5 extraordinary events manifested immediately after Moses' passing, decisively altering the course of history. The first of these was so enigmatic that, to this day, it remains incredible to many. Even now, scholars and experts strive to comprehend the true nature of what transpired. Some maintain that it was an intervention of divine origin, while others interpret it as a verdict or judgment. Nevertheless, one certainty endures. After Moses' departure, normalcy ceased to exist. What if I told you that Moses' body was never found, and that a dispute between celestial beings and malevolent entities erupted over his remains? But that's not all. Did you know that on the day of his death, the sustenance that fell from the sky simply stopped appearing? Prepare yourself, because what happened after Moses' death will completely transform your understanding of this narrative. After 120 years of leading the nation of Israel, Moses ascends Mount Nebo, gazes upon the promised land he would never set foot on, and there he expires. At that point, one of the most fascinating narratives in the scriptures begins. The Bible relates that the Creator himself buried him in a valley in the region of Moab. Wait a moment. The Creator personally burying someone? That didn't happen with anyone else. And do you know what's most striking? To this day, the whereabouts of that tomb are unknown. But the situation becomes even more peculiar upon discovering what happened moments after his death. In the short book of Jude, verse 9, something astonishing is revealed. A supernatural contention was waged over Moses' body. Archangel Michael and Satan fiercely fought over those remains. Why, in a literal sense, did Satan so fervently desire Moses' body? Specialists propose intriguing hypotheses. Some assert that Satan intended to transform Moses' tomb into a place of worship, thus seeking to divert the people from God. Imagine this. The man who spoke directly with the divine, converted into an idol. And there's more. Do you remember that Moses committed a fault by striking a rock instead of simply speaking to it? It is probable that Satan argued he had a right over that body due to that sin. However, Michael, the prince of angels, was not intimidated. The struggle was so fierce that Michael had invoked divine authority, proclaiming, "The Lord rebuke you." The outcome? Moses' body completely disappeared. God hid it in such a way that no archaeologist, explorer, or treasure hunter has ever managed to find it, despite countless attempts. This enigma has remained unsolved for over 3,400 years. No one has ever discovered the location of Moses' body or tomb. Certain biblical scholars believe that there was a particular reason for this mystery. Years later, according to the New Testament, something astonishing occurred. Moses appeared alive, conversing with Jesus on a mountain. How is it possible that someone who died so long ago could appear in that way? This is another of the enigmas surrounding Moses' demise. For those who do not profess a faith, the question persists, why hide a tomb as well? Moses' death did not merely mark the end of an era. It was the beginning of a series of supernatural events that would completely alter Israel's destiny. The disappearance of his body was only the initial indication that something out of the ordinary was happening. And if that already seems astonishing to you, prepare yourself, because a day after Moses' death, something even more impactful occurred. The food that fell from the sky every morning for 40 years simply stopped falling. How would Israel survive now? If you believe that God protects his servants even after their departure, comment, God is faithful. It was as if heaven had suddenly closed its provisions. The morning after Moses' death, the people of Israel woke up to a surprise no one expected. The ground was clean, no manna. That bread that fell from the sky every day, without fail for 40 years, simply stopped falling. Imagine the scene. Millions of people leaving their tents with their empty baskets, searching for the daily food that had always been there. But that morning they only found sand and stones. Panic seized the camp. How are we going to survive now? Was a question heard everywhere. For decades, manna was the main food source for an entire people. It was a white substance with a honey-like taste that appeared every morning like dew. They only had to go out, collect, and eat. No one needed to sow, harvest, or work hard. It was literally food from heaven. But with Moses' death and the entry into the promised land, everything changed. The manna stopped falling exactly when they crossed to the other side of the Jordan River. It was as if God said, "Now you have land, now work it." The transition was brutal. A people who never needed to cultivate anything now had to learn agriculture from scratch. People who only knew the routine of collecting manna now had to plow, sow, wait, and harvest. The desperation was so great that many began to complain against Joshua, the new leader. With Moses, we had guaranteed food, some claimed. Why did God abandon us? Others questioned. But Joshua remained calm and explained that the promised land was a land of abundance, but it required effort. The time of daily miracles had ended. Now it was time to work the land flowing with milk and honey. The first few months were the most difficult. The people had to ration the manna they had saved while learning to cultivate. Many went hungry, and others even went back to eating the things they ate in Egypt. It was a tremendous cultural and economic shock. But something extraordinary happened when they made the first harvest. They discovered that the land was truly blessed. The wheat grew taller. The fruits were sweeter. The olive trees gave more oil. It was as if the land compensated for the 40 years of waiting. Still, many missed the manna. There was something special about receiving food directly from heaven. It was a daily connection with the divine, a constant reminder that God cared for them. Now, that connection had to be maintained in other ways. The cessation of manna signified a profound transformation in the relationship between God and his people. It was no longer a relationship of childlike dependence, but of a mature partnership. God granted the land, and the people worked it. God blessed, and the people administered. Curiously, the last jar of manna was preserved as a relic inside the Ark of the Covenant. It served as a reminder for future generations that there was a time when heaven fed the earth daily, a period that ended with Moses' death. This event imparted a valuable lesson. The end of a miracle does not always imply abandonment. Sometimes it is a sign of maturity. The people of Israel were prepared for a new phase, a stage where faith would manifest not by waiting for manna to fall, but by cultivating the land, trusting that God would bless their effort. And if that seemed impactful to you, prepare yourself, because Moses' death altered something even more fundamental: the way God communicated with his people. Never again would anyone converse face-to-face with the Creator. Do you know that feeling of losing cell phone signal right in the middle of an important conversation? Now, multiply it by 1,000,000. That's more or less how the people of Israel felt when Moses died. Suddenly, the direct line to God went silent. For 40 years, Moses enjoyed a privilege no one else has had in history. He spoke with God face to face, like friends. When the people had doubts, Moses ascended the mountain and returned with the answers. When problems arose, he entered the tent of meeting and left with divine solutions. It was like having a direct phone to heaven. But with Moses' demise, that exclusive channel closed. Joshua, the new leader, did not have the same kind of access, which created an unprecedented crisis. How will we know what to do now? The people wondered. Who will speak to God for us? Anxiety gripped the camp. There were crucial decisions to make: how to conquer the land, how to divide territories, how to judge disputes. Without Moses, who will provide the answers? It was then that a new system of communication emerged: the Urim and Thummim. These were two mysterious stones kept in the high priest's breastplate. They functioned like a kind of divine dice. When consulted, they gave yes or no answers to specific questions. Imagine the contrast: from detailed, direct conversations with God to binary answers mediated by stones. It was like exchanging a cell phone for smoke signals. The people had to adapt to this new reality, learning to formulate questions that could be answered with a yes or a no. But the transformation didn't stop there. Prophets began to emerge as a new way of divine communication. Unlike Moses, they did not speak directly with God, but received visions, dreams, and messages that they had to interpret. This was a more intricate and often more confusing process. This change triggered serious conflicts. Many people posed as prophets, but how could one distinguish the true ones without Moses to confirm them? The people became vulnerable to false messengers. Criteria began to be established to evaluate prophets. Their prophecies had to come true. They could not contradict Moses' law, and they could not lead the people to worship other deities. The absence of direct communication also modified the way the people related to God. Before, They knew that any problem could be taken to Moses, and he would bring a divine answer. Now, they had to learn to trust more in the written law and less in constant revelations. Priests gained much more importance. It was they who consulted the Urim and Thummim, interpreted the law, and mediated between God and the people. Religious power, once concentrated in Moses, was now distributed among various figures. Interestingly, this transition forced the people to mature spiritually. Without a constant intermediary, they had to develop a more personal relationship with God. Individual prayer gained importance, and meditation on the law became essential. It was like leaving the parents' house and learning to stand on one's own feet. Some scholars believe that this transition was necessary to prepare the people for the future. If they continued to depend on a single mediator, they would never develop spiritual maturity. Moses' death propelled an evolution in Israel's faith. The impact of this transformation was so profound that it resonated throughout subsequent religious history. The model of prophets, priests, and sacred scriptures that emerged after Moses' passing formed the basis of many modern religions. And just when you thought it couldn't get more dramatic, Moses' absence nearly triggered something unthinkable: a civil war among the tribes of Israel themselves. What happened was so grave that it almost destroyed the nation before it officially began. If you ever felt that God changed the way he speaks to you, comment, God speaks in many ways. As soon as Moses' body disappeared, the tribes of Israel were already on the verge of killing each other. It's no exaggeration. A civil war almost erupted that would have annihilated the nation before it even formed, and all because of an altar, the controversial altar. Imagine the confusion. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh had received their lands on the east side of the Jordan River when Moses was still alive. He had agreed to this on the condition that they would help the other tribes conquer the rest of the Promised Land. Promise fulfilled, battles won. Those tribes returned to their lands on the other side of the river. So far, so good. But then they did something that almost caused a bloodbath. They built a gigantic altar on the bank of the Jordan. The other tribes went wild. How can they build an altar? There can only be one altar, that of the tabernacle. This is betrayal. This is idolatry. Within hours, an army formed, thousands of armed men ready to slaughter their own brothers. The tension was palpable. Without Moses to mediate, no one knew how to resolve it. Joshua was overwhelmed. The people were divided. It seemed that decades of unity in the desert would end in tragedy. But then something happened that saved Israel. Instead of attacking immediately, they sent a delegation led by Phinehas, the son of the high priest. What does this altar mean? Are you betraying us? Are you abandoning the God of Israel? The response from the eastern tribes was astonishing. No, we did not build this altar for sacrifices. It is only a memorial, a witness. We are afraid that in the future your children will say to ours, you on the other side of the river do not belong to Israel. This altar is proof that we are one people. The explanation made sense, but distrust persisted. This episode revealed deep fractures in Israel's unity. Without Moses' unquestionable authority, each tribe began to act on its own. Decisions became more democratic, but also more chaotic. Other minor conflicts began to arise, disputes over territory, water, pastures. Each tribe sought what was best for itself. The spirit of unity that had kept the people cohesive for 40 years in the desert began to unravel. Joshua noticed the danger and convened a great assembly. All the tribes were summoned. It was necessary to establish new rules, new agreements. Without Moses, they had to find other ways to maintain unity. It was in that assembly that the system of tribal elders was born. Each tribe would have its representatives, who would meet regularly to resolve disputes. It was the beginning of a primitive form of decentralized government. But the trauma of that near civil war profoundly marked the nation. The eastern tribes were always viewed with some distrust. In the following centuries, they were the first to be besieged by enemies, the first to lose their Israelite identity. That episode showed how Moses' death created a dangerous power vacuum. A charismatic leader respected by all had departed. The irony is that Moses spent 40 years preparing the people for the Promised Land, but he didn't prepare them to live without him. Perhaps he thought Joshua would be enough. Or perhaps he didn't imagine that his absence would have such an impact. The altar of discord eventually received the name El, which means witness. It remained there for centuries, reminding everyone of the day Israel almost self-destructed, a monument not to unity, but to fragility of human relationships without strong leadership. And the most impressive part was yet to come, because with all those crises, with all that chaos, Israel still managed to transform from a group of nomadic ex-slaves into an established nation. How was that possible? The transformation into a nation. Now we come to the most extraordinary moment. Amidst all the chaos caused by Moses' death, the unimaginable happened. Israel finally became a true nation, and it was precisely Moses' absence that forced that transformation. For 40 years, Israel was a wandering people. It had no territory or government of its own. It lived in tents and depended on daily miracles. They were more a nomadic religious group than a nation proper. But all that changed when Moses died. The first major change was territorial. Without Moses centralizing leadership, each tribe had to take responsibility for its own portion of land. Joshua divided Canaan among the tribes by lot, a method that avoided favoritism and conflict. Suddenly, people who had never owned a home became landowners. Families who had lived in tents for generations began building stone houses. Nomadic shepherds became sedentary farmers. It was an unprecedented social revolution, political and legal evolution. But the most profound change was political. The laws that Moses received at Sinai ceased to be mere religious commandments and became the constitution of a nation. Without Moses to interpret each case, the people needed to create a judicial system. Local judges emerged, chosen from among the elders of each city. For more complex cases, there were regional courts, and for issues affecting the entire nation, a council of elders met. It was the beginning of a structured legal system. Economic revolution. The economy also transformed. In the desert, everything was shared. Manna was distributed equally. Offerings sustained the Levites. There was no commerce. Now, with their own lands, private property, commerce, and markets emerged. Israel entered the economy of the ancient Near East. Culturally, the change was radical. A people who lived isolated in the desert now coexisted with Canaanites, Phoenicians, and Philistines. They learned new technologies such as metallurgy, construction, and navigation. The Hebrew language absorbed foreign words and cuisine diversified. Militarily, they ceased to be a disorganized horde and became a confederation of tribes with their own militias. Each tribe defended its territory, but they united against external threats. It was the embryo of Israel's future army. Religiously, worship became decentralized. Although the tabernacle remained in Shiloh as the main center, local altars, high places, and tribal sanctuaries emerged. This would cause problems later on, but initially, it helped consolidate the Israelite presence in the land. The most fascinating thing is that this entire transformation occurred because Moses was no longer there. His absence forced the people to mature, to make decisions, and organize themselves. It was like a child who only learns to walk when their parents let go of their hand. Scholars call this period the Age of Judges, and it lasted about 200 years. It was a turbulent era marked by ups and downs, victories and defeats, but it was during that time that Israel developed its unique national identity. The irony is that Moses dedicated his entire life to trying to create a nation, but it was his death that finally allowed it to happen. Sometimes, a leader's greatest legacy is knowing when to step aside, allowing others to grow. Thus, from the ashes of Moses' loss, Israel was born as a nation, a people who learned to walk on their own, keeping alive the memory and teachings of their great leader, but building their own destiny. Now that you've seen how Moses' death completely changed the history of Israel, we invite you to explore more. Discover the tragic end and the last request of the apostles before they died. An even more impressive story awaits you.